After watching nearly 200 snaps of new Washington Commanders wide receiver Noah Brown's game film, I can use two words to describe him best: competitive toughness. That and more coming up on today's episode of Locked On Commanders.
You are Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome in, everybody, to today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, David Harrison, credentialed member of the media covering the Washington Commanders for Sports Illustrated's CommanderGameDay.com. And I'm here with you every Monday through Friday. Greatly appreciate you coming through today. Every dayers, I appreciate you coming through every single day. This is your daily podcast covering the Washington Commanders. And if you haven't already, you can subscribe for free on YouTube or wherever you are listening to today's episode, where we're going to talk about Jayden Daniels and why he's likely to disregard some of the guidance that head coach Dan Quinn is giving him entering into this long holiday weekend. We're also going to talk about what Assistant General Manager Lance Newmark said when he was asked what the intangibles were that he's looking in a Commanders football player, which will help piece together some of the things that have happened this season. But we're starting it off with our film review of new Washington Commanders wide receiver Noah Brown. If you want to discuss any of that or anything else Washington Commanders related, and you want access and bonus content that goes beyond the show here, all you have to do is become a Locked On Commanders insider. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders to sign up to do that today. Again, joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders to become an insider today and go beyond the show. The reason for the Jahan Dotson trade, right? The Washington Commanders trade first-round draft pick receiver Jahan Dotson to the Philadelphia Eagles. And again, we've already kind of talked about why it was the Philadelphia Eagles, probably the limitation of options and other teams kind of coming in with offers that are at least similar to what they end up getting for Jahan. But the reason, the crux of the reason, the base for the reason of the trade in the first place is simply that Jahan Dotson just did not fit what the Washington Commanders wanted for their team. And I think that it's an interesting dialogue because there's been some criticism of a team giving up on a first round pick too early and trading him and just doing all these other things. But at the same time, we also have these dialogues going on about Jamin Davis and how he didn't fit what the Washington Commanders are trying to do, but the Washington Commanders continually just tried to make him fit what they're trying to do anyway. Emmanuel Forbes didn't fit, didn't have the skill set that the Washington Commanders were looking for, yet they tried to make it work anyway, so on and so forth. And there's other players that kind of fit into this narrative. Well, here what we have is a situation where the Washington Commanders said, this is the type of receiver we want on the outside. Jahan didn't really fit that mold, didn't really produce and perform the way that they needed a receiver on the outside to perform. So they said, okay, we'll move you into the slot. And that's when all this, who's the number two and is Jahan falling out of favor, really kind of started. And then in the slot, they also said, okay, well, you're also not doing what we need you to do in the slot. So let's go ahead and put you somewhere where you can do what you need to do, and we'll get what we need back, which is draft capital, and then we'll go get a guy who can fit. So instead of trying to force it with Jahan, they said, let's just call this what it is. It's not a fit. We'll move forward and let's go find a fit. And the Washington Commanders did that by going out and getting Noah Brown, not a former first-round draft pick, not the sexiest name in the world. Yes, he's got an injury history, but you bring the player on for what he can do, not for what you don't think he can't do, right? So to get a better knowledge of what Noah Brown is all about and to try to learn why the Washington Commanders brought him in there, because that's basically what this is he fits what the Washington Commanders want to do. And I don't think he's necessarily a one-for-one swap for Jahan Dotson on the roster and all those things, but that is, of course, the latest receiver to leave and then the newest one to come in. So the comparison is going to be natural. And like I said in the opening there's two words I got to use to describe Noah Brown. It is competitive toughness. So I watched 3 games. 3 games is the minimum whenever we do film studies. So I watched 3 games. All 3 games are from 2023. I watched him playing with the Houston Texans against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in week 9, against the Cincinnati Bengals in week 10, and against the Tennessee Titans in week 15. 2 of those are road games. One of them's a home game. Against the Buccaneers in week 9 in Houston, he had 6 targets, 6 catches, 153 yards, and a touchdown. He had 52 offensive snaps, 9 special team snaps. Houston Texans at the Cincinnati Bengals the very next week, week 10. Brown had 8 targets, 7 catches, 172 yards, played 56 snaps on offense, 5 on special teams. Houston Texans at the Tennessee Titans in week 15, which was the first of the 2 matchups between the 2 divisional foes last year. 11 targets, 8 catches, 82 yards, 66 offensive snaps. And the reason I chose that Titans game is because 66 offensive snaps was the most offensive snaps Brown had all last year. So I wanted to get his 2 best games, and I wanted to get the game that he played the most reps on offense. So in total, we watched 109 pass plays and 63 rush plays. So I watched all those reps so that you don't have to, and I'm here to tell you what I found. So we got a lot to cover, and we're going to kind of break this down into some receiver-specific evaluation points that we tend to look at. And I say we, again, every scout is a little bit different. Every GM, every team does things a little bit differently. But generally speaking, every team is going to really want to deep dive into a wide receiver's release, into his ability to separate, into his hands, and then I added blocking ability in there. I mean, every NFL team is going to want to know how much of a blocker, how good of a blocker the receiver is anyway, but specifically we're going to cover blocking here with Noah because he's a very good blocker. So I wanted to talk about it. And then physicality is something that I threw in there as well. Some people, again, will call it competitive toughness, whatever you want to call it, but that's basically what it boils down to. So we've got those 4 categories rather, to look at with Noah. And we're going to start with separation. So when you're a release, we're going to start with release. Sorry, separations next. We're going to start with our release. So when you're talking about a player's release, you're talking about literally just from where you line up on the line of scrimmage to how you get off the line of scrimmage and into your stem, which is the shooting out portion of a route. So you want to see that a guy has a plan. You want to see how he uses his technique, his use of hands, especially when in press coverage, how he reduces surface area. So a lot of times if guys are playing against off coverage against the defense, you need to reduce that space. You need to eat that cushion because that cushion is what makes that defender feel comfortable. You want the defender to feel uncomfortable, and then strength through contact. Big guys like Noah Brown, he's listed as 6'2". I mean, look, I stood next to him yesterday. I would argue that he's probably more 6'3", 6'4". He's probably like on the edge of 6'3", if anything. And then when you watch him on tape, he definitely plays bigger than a 6'2" wide receiver. So those are kind of the things that we're looking for, right? So what I noticed in the game tape, he's got a very smooth release, no false step, no misstep. He comes out of his stance very smooth, very quickly. Usually one of the first guys off the line of scrimmage at the snap. When he plays against off coverage, which most of the coverage I saw him play against in these 3 games was off coverage, he does a very good job of attacking that cushion effectively. Doesn't lose a lot of momentum while he's coming in. Sometimes you'll see receivers, they kind of come off the line against off coverage and they kind of are jogging, right? And if they're jogging, it kind of gives that defender an idea that you're probably running a short breaking route, or you're probably running a curl or a comeback, a hitch, or whatever you want to call it, something like that. You're not probably running a deep route. Now, of course, the most disciplined DBs are still going to stay back a little bit in case the double move is on, or you're trying to lure me into some sort of a trap. But the thing that's good about Noah Brown, and the thing that's good about the best receivers in the NFL, is every release, every attack to the cushion, every stem basically starts off looking the same. It's what they do within it, the little nuances, and how they get in and out of their breaks that really kind of changes things. When especially when you're playing against off coverage. So Noah Brown does that fairly well. I'm not saying he's one of the best in the league at doing it, but he does it fairly well. Doesn't lose a lot of momentum through contact. That's really important because he is a bigger dude. So guys in press, they're going to try to jam him up. They're going to try and knock him off of his rhythm, try and knock him off of his stem before he can fully get into it. But you see him not lose a lot of momentum in that contact. Also uses his hands very effectively, very violent hands when he's trying to get a defender off of him. I always kind of, whenever I watch it on the table, I always kind of say, get off me. Like that's just kind of the attitude you kind of have to have. And then, like I said, strong hands against press corners to prevent being stalled in his release. And that's all within the first, at the line of scrimmage, within the first like 3 yards of the line of scrimmage. Those are all things that we're kind of noticing about Noah Brown. And again, kind of going back to what this team is looking for, that's what they're looking for. The more aggressive you are as an offense, the more aggressive defenses tend to be. And then when you look at these opponents, especially week 1 against Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and Noah is not here just to face the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, but you watch him against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, they play a very physical brand of football. They play very physically at the line of scrimmage throughout the routes. And you see a guy like Noah Brown being able to use his size, but also be able to use the violence in his hands and physicality to make sure that he can counter the defensive backs' physicality as well and match it, if not exceed it, and still be able to get open for his quarterback. So very positive stuff coming out of Noah Brown's release tape, right, that we watched. And again, 109 pass plays that we watched. Not all of them were targets for Noah, obviously, but 45 out of 55 of them coming out of the slot, which I think is where you're going to see him play a lot with the Washington Commanders. But we still got a few more areas to cover, and we've got probably the strongest part of his game coming up in our next segment, his hands. His hands are very, very impressive. We'll get further into that coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode of Locked On Commanders is brought to you by 5 Hour Energy. Are you tired after lunch? Well, you're not alone. In fact, research shows that more than 70% of us hit a wall after lunchtime. Let a 5 Hour Energy shot help you leap over that wall instead of crashing into it. 5 Hour Energy fixes tired fast. Whether you have a long list to do for work or a list of DIY projects to tackle at home, 5 Hour Energy shots give you the feeling of alertness and energy you need to get into the zone. With zero sugar and a convenient portable size, it's the perfect pick me up for getting stuff done. The 5 Hour Energy website has flavors galore like watermelon, tropical burst, grape, berry, and more. On the site, you even have the option to build your own 12-pack or 24-pack. You choose the flavors and it is delivered right to your door. So if you go to 5hourenergy.com, that's the number 5hourenergy.com, and get some 5 Hour Energy product today, you can use the promo code LOCKEDONFB, all one word, to receive 20% off your order. This offer only valid until September 30th on one order, cannot be used with other promotions, and the code is not good on subscription orders. Go to 5hourenergy.com today. From looking at the tape, we know that Noah Brown's release is smooth off the line of scrimmage, very consistent, and he's very, very capable of facing physical press contact from defenders and using his violent hands to get off that contact and not interrupt his ability to get into his stem. But what else does he offer according to his game film? That's coming up next. Thank you for making Locked On Commanders your first listen today. For your second listen, check out the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. Get your daily insight into the best fantasy strategies so you can win your league this season, all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So after release, we've got separation. That's the next part of this thing, whether it's in the stem, at the break point. You want to look at a player's separation, how they use their leverage to their advantage, how they diagnose coverage, especially when they're facing zone. How do you diagnose that zone coverage? Find where you need to be for your quarterback. Your tempo and stem. We kind of already talked about that when it comes to attacking cushion and off coverage, but the tempo in your stem, the manipulation in your stem, the use of hands, again, your break speed, change of direction, and burst. Of course, a lot of this is kind of when applicable, right? But bottom line, right off the release, you see Noah Brown has a really good sense of leverage and really knows how to kind of use that leverage and use that size. Again, I say he kind of plays bigger than he's listed, and you can see him kind of using that size to his advantage. And does a really good job of finding room in the defense when possible with good tempo in his stem. Again, you want that urgency, right? You want to get to the point that you need to be for your quarterback as quickly as possible, with everything in mind of what you got to do for your route. And he does that very consistently as well. Something that really kind of stood out on the tape as far as the separation is concerned is he can manipulate the defenders a little bit more, but he is strong with his hands. So he does manipulate using his size. When I talk about you being able to manipulate even more, kind of go back to that De'Ami Brown explosive play against New York Jets, where he's kind of leaning into a guy and not so much using his size, but using the path that he's taking to also manipulate the defender. I think that's somewhere that Noah Brown could get a little bit better looking at just those 3 games on his tape. But that's something that, again, when you have that physical advantage over some of these guys, you don't necessarily feel the need to. But if you were to kind of do that just a little bit, not only have that size advantage, but also maybe bend them away from where the ball is going to come, give you even better opportunities to catch these passes. But he uses, again, strong hands. Like strong hands is going to be a consistent theme throughout this entire film review. Because when he's meeting contact at the top of his break or throughout his route, uses really strong hands to get clean breaks off of the defender, which are oftentimes rounded, right? He's not the most, like you kind of see people talk about, like when you break in or break out, you want to kind of sit in the chair and chop your feet. Doesn't really do that a lot. A lot of his breaks are rounded, or they're not kind of the cleanest at all in the world, but they are effective, right? He uses that size leverage, uses those physical hands, get off me, get away from me, and gets his body around for his quarterback. Change of direction is actually a plus, which is a little bit surprising because guys who don't chop their feet very well, or very often, I should say, guys who don't get low in their breaks tend to also have a kind of clunky change of direction ability. But when you actually see Noah go from like an inside cut to an outside, or an outside jab to an inside cut, whatever it is, he actually has pretty good change of direction ability, doesn't lose a lot of momentum when he's doing those things as well. So, and I think his burst is underrated. There were several times on tape against all teams, the Titans, the Bengals, and the Buccaneers, where it looked like defenders maybe didn't think he was going to be as fast as he actually was coming out of his breaks or running up the field with the ball. So I think that his speed, his burst is a little bit underrated, and he used that to his advantage against defenders who were maybe sleeping on that a little bit. And then maybe the most important part after the break, because not every pass play is perfect, not every quarterback gets the ball out at the top of their drop. Defenders get paid to play and all that stuff too. He stays alive for his quarterback. Very consistently, you will see Noah Brown running around the field, runs his route, but if his quarterback still has the ball, his route's finished, he's looking for space, and he's pretty good at finding space. Those second play opportunities that coaches will talk about with the scramble plays and all those things. So as Jayden Daniels gets to know Noah Brown a little bit better, he's also going to get to know that when he's running around, when he's trying to extend plays, Noah, number 85, is a guy that he can trust to be out there trying to extend that play and make a play for him as well. And that's going to be really a big building block, I think, to building confidence between Jayden Daniels and Noah Brown. Another key building block to building that confidence, Noah Brown's hands. This dude has got some of the strongest hands I've ever seen on tape. So when we're talking about hands, we're not just talking about can he catch, right? We're also talking about ball tracking while it's in the air, grip strength, which is huge, catching the ball away from your frame, and ball security. Good ball tracker on film, but excellent grip strength. I mean, this dude is bringing in catches above his head, away from his body, low, whatever, with defenders climbing all over him, with defenders swiping at his arm, swiping at the ball, and I mean, just clamping down on them, like vice grip type grip on the ball. It's actually really impressive if you go back and watch it. Good ball security. Again, guys are punching at the ball, trying to get it away from him, whether it's during the run after the catch or during the actual catching process, regularly making catches through contact, which is a rookie quarterback's best friend. Honestly, I saw a lot of passes in this film from CJ Stroud where the ball is not where you want it to be. Like, he's making Noah go up, go out, go over, but Noah's making the plays for his quarterback through contact. Like I said, vice grip type hands. Only saw one ball that touched his hands that he didn't bring in, and that one was incredibly high. Great reaction time to unexpected ball trajectories. Again, when you're a receiver, right, like you break and you're kind of like, okay, the ball should be, square in my chest or whatever, and it's actually like 2 feet above my head. He's got great reaction time, getting up there and grabbing those passes for his quarterback. So his hands really stand out on tape. I think that might be the strongest part of his game overall, but all of it, the release, the breaks, the separation, and the staying alive, all that stuff kind of builds into it. And then the hands are really what kind of puts it all together. As a blocker, because it's something that Noah Brown himself, when he talked to us on Thursday, talked about how he's kind of proud of his blocking ability as a receiver. I saw the Houston Texans use him as a jet sweep blocker, so jet sweep motion, but instead of running him out on a route, he actually stayed in and took on a defensive end or a blitzing linebacker. So as a pull blocker, did very well there. I've seen him chip before going into some routes to help out his blocking scheme and help out his quarterback. Does very well there. And overall, just a willing blocker who's overall well aware of his opportunity and then the best chance of impacting the play, especially in run plays. He understands where he needs to go to give his running back the best chance to be successful. Uses pretty standard receiver blocking technique, which is not the best blocking technique, right? It's more standing upright. And, I feel like receivers and DBs kind of have this unspoken understanding of, you don't come full, 100% trying to block me. I'm not going to go 100% trying to run through your block. But when a defender does challenge him physically and try to get around him or trying to get through him or whatever, Noah does respond in kind and does very well. Of course, the closer his block is to the line of scrimmage and the more important it is to springing the run in the initial stages, the more physical he gets. And you see that physicality really jump off the tape. And that's the last portion of the film review, right? His physicality. Fights hard for yards after catch. Very rarely is the first guy going to bring him down very easily, unless it's like during the catch process, right? Shows great field sense as a receiver in traffic, but also as a ball carrier. Has a very strong stiff arm. There was a stiff arm that he threw on Buccaneers cornerback, well, now former Buccaneers cornerback Carlton Davis, on a 75-yard touchdown play against the Bucs last season that just put Carlton Davis on his butt. Demonstrates great body control, going up for passes, all these things, understanding kind of where the defender is. You see receivers kind of catch the ball. There's a defender over the right shoulder, so they go to the left side. Like, Noah is really aware of kind of what's going on around him and controls his body very well to manipulate that space. So a lot of good there. And again, typically when you're looking at this tape, you're looking for what they can do. You're not going to harp on what they can't do. Not the most polished route runner, all that stuff. And certainly the injury history has been there. But when he's healthy, he showed with the Houston Texans last year that he's got a good amount of ability, and he's a guy that a young rookie quarterback can rely on as a reliable target. So I think that's, again, another reason the Washington Commanders are bringing him in here. He fits a lot of what they want to do as a big slot, can play in the perimeter, can help out as a blocker, and he's going to be reliable and consistent and give maximum effort to help his rookie quarterback. So it all fits what the Washington Commanders are trying to do. What are the Washington Commanders looking for in a player? Assistant General Manager Lance Newmark was asked what the intangibles are for a Commanders player, and we're going to go over his answer and why Jayden Daniels may be disregarding some guidance from head coach Dan Quinn this weekend. That's coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode of Locked On Commanders brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. That's what it takes to bring home the Lombardi Trophy, and eBay Motors knows that's also what it takes to keep your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Whether you're looking for superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, they've got even more than that. If you're looking for speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts, your number one ride or die, you're always going to find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or you get your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need, the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. So keep your ride or die vehicle alive with that passion, with all those parts, and with all that patience. Go to ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Commanders, we're going to look at a couple of quotes here that stood out from Thursday's press conferences. We heard from assistant GM Lance Newmark, head coach Dan Quinn, and quarterback Jayden Daniels. And we've got two here, one from Lance Newmark, the assistant GM, and one from quarterback Jayden Daniels that actually relates to a quote from Dan Quinn, which we're not going to dive into, but it's going to tie together. You'll see. But we're going to start with Lance Newmark. So we met with Lance Newmark before practice on Thursday, and Lance was asked by one reporter what the ideal intangibles are for a Washington Commanders player. And in response, Lance said, quote, "I feel at their core, they have to love football, and they have to love the work, and they have to love to be in the building. It's not just game day, it's a process, and they have to love the process. It's not for everyone. This is a demanding environment, and it's a team environment. It's about winning games as a team, about working hard together. And I think those are the core traits that we look for. People that love football, that love to be around each other, and love to work," end quote. What I thought was really interesting, this is an assistant GM, right? He came up to Lance Newmark, just like most assistant GMs and GMs, through the talent evaluation part of the game. So he's scouting speed, releases, catch, like everything we just talked about Noah Brown. That's what Lance Newmark has come up in the NFL evaluating. But you hear in his answer, none of those things. Nowhere did he say, well, Commanders players got to be fast. They've got to be physical. They've got to be super talented, right? No, what did he say? He said they've got to love football. And this kind of goes back to conversations we've already been having. Every NFL team is talented, right? Like bottom line is the worst roster in the NFL is stocked with elite athletes. Like the saying that I always use is it takes a lot of talent, athletic ability to suck in the National Football League. Like it just does. So typically when a team is struggling, it's usually not because they're devoid of talent. It's because they're devoid of fits. It's because they're devoid of passion. It's because they're devoid of just the chemistry. And it doesn't always come from the roster. Sometimes it comes from the coaches. Sometimes it comes from the owner. You know what I mean? It can come from any different level of an organization. So when you talk about it, right, you have to love football. So you look at the Washington Commanders, our building, and it starts at the top, right? You talk to Josh Harris. We spoke to him before the Sunday night preseason game against the New England Patriots. One of the things he was asked was, how much of your natural fandom is driving some of the things you're doing around this franchise? And he said big time. He brought up again his memories as a child, walking into RFK Stadium, hearing those noises, experiencing those sounds and those smells, and the exhilaration of watching Washington football be successful. That's a passion. That's a love for the game, and that needs to trickle on down. The GM's got to love the work. The assistant GM's got to love the work. The coaches got to love coaching. The players got to love playing. And as much as a lot of us will sit at home or sit in the press box and say, man, these guys are getting paid millions of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars to play a game, why wouldn't you love that? The truth is, not all these guys love it, right? And when you look at the guys that they're replacing, it's because of a fit somewhere. So some of these guys, like I mentioned, Jahan Dotson, not a fit because they need a bigger slot. They need a more physical guy that can help out as a blocker, but can also get off that press, aggressive coverage. Jahan wasn't fitting that mold, so they went a different direction. Now, I know there were reports of Jahan also having a bad attitude and all these things. I can only tell you from my observation of him on the practice field and everything else, I never really picked up on a bad attitude. Jahan is kind of a low-key dude just anyway, but I never really picked up on like a bad attitude. I did get the vibe he wasn't all that happy about being tested as a punt returner, to be quite honest with you, but that goes beyond the receiver part, right? The receiver part, I didn't sense any ill will or anything like that. But so for me, they're more replacing the scheme fit, right? The physicality fit than they are the attitude fit. But some of these other guys could have been replaced due to the love of the game fit, right? They may not be that type of guy. And that kind of brings us into Jayden Daniels, because Dan Quinn was asked, what is the message? What is his message to the team as they go into this long break? So the team's off Friday, off Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. Wednesday is their first practice for the regular season. So these guys have some time to get out and go and, maybe go home. I know some guys live in like Arizona and they're going to go home for a few days and just kind of chill out at the crib, right? Dan Quinn said he wants them to prioritize getting away from the game, relax a little bit, take a breather, take a step back from it, as much as possible. He admitted himself he's going to go do an after action review, which every dayers you recognize because we do after action reviews during the season here on the show. It's a military term that Dan Quinn learned from his military friends. I'm sure, AARs are not only for the military. Don't want to put it that way, but Dan learned it from his friends in the military. So he's doing an AAR of training camp, preseason, and kind of making these notes so that next year he's got accurate notes from when he was actually in it. But after that, he plans on getting away from football a little bit. Jayden Daniels was asked if his weekend break is going to involve football. And Jayden said, quote, quite possibly. I mean, you can't really take away football, but I don't know. We're going to see, end quote. And you could tell in the moment when Jayden was answering the question, because he knows what Dan Quinn said, right? Get away from football a little bit. He wants to be the good soldier. He wants to say, like, yeah, I'm going to get away from football because that's what coach wants. But Jayden also is honest with himself and honest with us and saying, you can't really take away football. Why? Because Jayden loves football. He loves competing. He loves the sport of it. He just loves it. So it's part of who he is. And because of that, he's just being honest. He's probably not going to be able to get away from football all that much. But that is the type of love for this game that this staff, and speaking from Assistant General Manager Lance Newmark specifically, that's what they're after. And that's what Jayden Daniels is showing. That's what guys like Frankie Louvu, who just love the joy of competition, Bobby Wagner loves the strategy of it, loves the mental part of it, all these guys. That's what you're looking for on this roster. So as you're going through your evaluations, right, if you watch a guy on tape or you watch an interview of a college player who's a star and they're like, hey, how much do you love playing this game? He's like, oh, man, I love the game, but I love the lifestyle even more. Whatever. You see a guy on the field who doesn't look like he's having a great time, probably not going to be a fit for the Washington Commanders. So something to keep your eye on as we go through this process of watching this Commanders team, not just build this year, but build for success year in, year out. That's going to be the common thread. Dudes who love to ball, or coaches, personnel who love to be part of that process. And of course, we love being part of that process here at Locked On Commanders, connecting you with the team, being your friends and your eyes and ears on the field as much as we can. Coming up in our next episode, we got another person who absolutely loves what they do. Aaron Schatz of FTN, creator of the DVOA, editor of the FTN Football Almanac, will be coming through here to talk about the Washington Commanders, some projections, some data, some fantasy stuff. It's going to be a great conversation, so make sure you come back for that. In the meantime, if you've got questions or comments or anything else Washington Commanders you want to talk to me about outside the show, all you got to do is send me a text message. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders and text me today. In the meantime, make Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast your next listen today and get your daily insight into the best fantasy strategies to help you win your league this season. As always, thanks so much for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day, every day. Thanks for coming through on a regular basis like you do. And until we speak again, if you're out and about, please be safe, be kind, and I will see you right back here next time for another episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.